All right, talking Pittsburgh Steelers right now. Of course, the combine is behind us. All eyes are focused now on the start of the new league year. And we're going to start seeing, of course, some free agency deals, some acquisitions across the board. And the Pittsburgh Steelers obviously have a lot of needs they need to address. The big headline grabber has been the quarterback position. Obviously, is Fields going to return? That seems to be the most likely thing based on reports. What's the deal with Russell Wilson? Are they going to draft a quarterback? We're going to put that to the side right now because obviously that's a headline grabber. But the Steelers actually have a handful of other moves and a lot of other great strategies they have to enact if they want to improve this roster and finally return to winning playoff games. And that's what we're going to get into right now. A handful of really good fits, some outstanding fits, some steals, some high value deals that the Steelers could pull off to add to their roster through free agency. And the good news is they've got 59 million bucks roughly in salary cap space according to overthecap.com. Obviously, some of that will go to whatever they do at quarterback, but the reality is the Steelers have the dollars. They can go out and make some massive moves. So without further ado, Miles, I will throw it over to you. Get us going. What's your first great fit here for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Yeah, Nick, I'm going to focus on one position group here to start, and I think it's a key one for the Steelers. We're talking about the wide receiver position. I think George Pickens is talented. Off-field issues, attitude problems aside, is very talented, but I think he needs another guy to be paired next to him. I think there's a couple of good fits out there, but the first one I want to start with is Chris Godwin. I think this is the high dollar option for the Steelers if they want to go out and spring for a guy that really brings a lot to the table. He's proven he can be a big name threat and really do some things aside from Pickens, take a little heat off of him. Let's go through his numbers really quick. I have it pulled up here. He's wide receiver, 29 years old, has a little bit of injury concerns, so that might be able to be factored into the negotiating side of things if you're able to get him. I think he's comes right now at $18 million cap hit with his contract the way that it is for the Buccaneers. Whether they trade him, release him, whatever the case is going to be there. But PFF grades really solid overall. 86.3, 85.7 receiving grade, and he doesn't drop anything. He has a 90.5 drop rating. I think Chris Godwin, it's the safe bet. It's the high dollar bet here for the Steelers. But I think it would be one, if they go after it, you can't really go wrong with a guy like Godwin. But switching it up just a tad, I think there's another really good receiver fit for this team as well. And I think that is none other than Darius Slayton for the Giants. I think this is the kind of the under radar one here. Slayton had a pretty bad year statistically and by the numbers, but I think there's a lot of potential there. And I think the Giants were just a very bad team last year. And I think you get them on a bit of a budget here because of that. But you look at Slayton's numbers, 28 years old, again, younger, not quite over 30. So that's a good sign for the Steelers. He had a 59 PFF grade, a 59.9 receiving grade, and 29.3 drop grade. All those are bad numbers, but I don't think that's indicative of the type of player that Slayton is. I think he's a strong player, a great vertical threat that would help open up the passing game for the Steelers. But I think you get him discount. He's got down year. He's got the ability to be a strong player for this Pittsburgh team, but I think he could be a really strong under the radar fit for this Steelers team. Nick, what do you think about these wide receiver options for Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I think they're both very interesting. And I think it's also important to understand here is that the headline grabbing names, I don't think are the best fit for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. I think you want to bring in grown ups at the wide receiver position. Obviously, Pickens, your hope grows up, but you got some young guys. You look at Calvin Austin, right? He's a dynamic player. Big fan of him, right? But you need someone that can come in and handle whatever's going to happen at the quarterback position. It may be volatile. It may be Fields and a rookie. It may be Sam Darnold. It may be who knows, right? There's a lot of things. Maybe it's Aaron Rodgers. Who knows, right? You're going to need someone to come in and handle that as a veteran acquisition, and you're looking for a grown up. But I think both these guys are grown ups. You got Godwin, worked with Tom Brady, winning environment in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Slayton, not from a winning environment, but he handled himself like a pro's pro in a disastrous culture. I always look for those kind of players. Those are guys I want to add to my locker room, guys that have been just stuck in really bad situations for a long part of their careers, a lot of losing, a lot of volatility, but they still are just workmanlike day in and day out. I actually kind of like when teams sign former Cleveland Browns players, for example, just because of how bad the Browns can traditionally be, right? You get a guy who really kept it together when he was in Cleveland. That usually means he's got a good head on his shoulders, and that's a really good reason to like Slayton there. And I really think what's interesting here for both of these moves is that the dollars kind of make sense. So Slayton signed a 2-year, $12 million deal for the New York Giants. That was his last contract before becoming a free agent. Over the cap.com currently values him, if you look at his valuation, at about $9.3 million. So obviously, very cheap, very affordable, solid player. You look at Chris Godwin, his valuation because of injuries is only $4 million. That's a little bit of a misnomer, of course, when he signed the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for a 3-year, $60 million deal a number of years ago. But it was kind of a funky deal with void years when the Bucs were trying to, ring chase there a little bit, of course. That's why his cap hit, if you actually look it up, he actually has an $18 million cap hit against the Bucs right now for 2025, even though he's a free agent. It's a weird deal that happens with the void years. But essentially what can happen is anyone can sign him. And I think the Steelers, honestly, I think Slayton, as weird as it sounds, is the better of the two options. Godwin's good. Don't get me wrong. I'd be okay if they got Godwin. But I think Slayton, to me, he is the guy who's handled so much disasters in New York. Pro's pro, doing the work day in and day out. And he worked well with Malik Neighbors, the young star wide receiver for the New York Giants. I think he could come in, work with Austin, work with Pickens, be a part of a solid wide receiver room, and just be the grown up, just be a mature, stabilizing influence. And guess what? He doesn't need a million targets to be effective. He found a way to be very consistent, be a solid part of the Giants offense, despite getting not a lot of touches and despite having a lot of issues at the quarterback position.
Yeah, Nick, and I think those are all great points. But the next thing that I want to address for the Pittsburgh Steelers is the linebacker position. I know maybe it sounds like, okay, we got Patrick Queen last year. They spent some money on him. And I think that's a really great point as why I picked the next two guys I did for the linebacker position. But also, you got the young guy and Peyton Wilson as well. But you need depth. You can't just rely on a guy like Wilson. He did some good stuff, but I think they need a little bit more depth here. And that's why the next guys I have up, I think, really help add that depth, add that veteran presence, and can be some really great signings for the Pittsburgh Steelers. First up on the list, I've got none other than Kansas City Chief Nick Bolton. I think this is a guy who he doesn't have all the physical tools necessarily, but he's a really smart player. I think he's got a lot of really great things that he did in that Spagnola defense, and it kind of fits the trickiness, the blitzing, the Pittsburgh Steelers type of zone blitz defense that they run. I think a guy like Nick Bolton can come in and handle that sort of system. When we look at what he brings to the table as far as his numbers, he's 24 years old, so he's young, or really a young guy you can add to this team. A long-term investment, PFF grade 65.4. Run defense, because Queen, he's a great pass rusher, but they need a guy to come in and do some good things in the run defense game, 67.1, as well as in the coverage game. He's good there as well, 66.1 for Nick Bolton in the coverage department, because I think Queen, he's a great player, not great in coverage. He's not great at run defense. He was really good at pass rushing. And Wilson, kind of the same way. Wilson's good in coverage, not very strong in run defense. That was his weakness here. If you get another guy to kind of fill the gaps here, I think that's what a Nick Bolton type of player does. But my second option here for the Pittsburgh Steelers is none other than Jamian Sherwood from the New York Jets. I think he's a really strong player. I think he's kind of, overlooked because of all of the strong players on the New York Jets defense, but he brings a ton to the table here. This is a guy, again, young, 25 years old. He brings 73.8 PFF grade, 77.1 run defense grade. That's what we're looking for here, and 66.2 coverage grade. I think Sherwood would be a very, very strong addition for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Kind of an under the radar guy. Nick Bolton's, he's been with the Chiefs. They've been to so many Super Bowls. You kind of know him, kind of that bigger name. Sherwood, a little bit more of the under the radar guy, but I also think he might even be, statistically speaking, the better fit for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. But nonetheless, either of these two guys I think could be good additions for the Steelers. But Nick, what do you think about these two options for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
So it comes down, if you look at the difference between Bolton and Sherwood, it's a difference between culture and production, right? Bolton comes from, of course, Super Bowl deep playoff culture that they have in the Kansas City Chiefs. Sherwood is a better player. He's one of the more underrated linebackers, maybe the most underrated linebacker in the National Football League. This guy can absolutely play. He's a phenomenal player. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers, they're looking for that third linebacker, right? or to be the third linebacker trio with Wilson, Queen last year. Landon Roberts played that role in a lot of run situations. They may switch up the responsibilities, but I think the Steelers want to have a three linebacker kind of unit, some three linebacker kind of rotations here. And I think they're looking for that third guy or the guy who would be the number two guy with Queen and Wilson becomes the third guy. And honestly, I think Sherwood is the steal of the offseason in terms of free agent acquisitions. Whoever can get him. I really think he's that good. I mean, this guy is unbelievable. He just plays for the Jets, and the Jets are so dysfunctional. Like I mentioned earlier, right? Getting good players that have found a way to be successful in dysfunctional environments. I love seeing that. Now, look, nothing against Bolton at all, right? He actually, interestingly enough, is essentially on a Landon Roberts cutout, right? Both good against the run, both only 6 feet tall, a little shorter, both about 233 pounds, little stocky guys, right? Good player and would be a very solid replacement for a guy like a Landon Roberts, who's now on the wrong side of 30. Of course, he's a free agent from formerly, of course, of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I think Sherwood's a better bet. I think he's just a better player. I think you're a better football team with Sherwood. And I think because he wants to win and he's tired of being with the Jets, there's a chance he doesn't take. If someone wants to outbid the Steelers, if the Steelers go after him, he may take a little bit of a discount to come play for Pittsburgh. And I think that's what the Steelers could use here. Because if you look at the dollars they're going to have to allocate at wide receiver, they may have to overpay a little bit because of their offensive situation. But if they're looking to get that third linebacker, they may be looking for a bit of a discount. And I think Sherwood, you could potentially get it because he's looking to win. Bolton, he's already won. This is his big payday. He's got the Super Bowl, titles, those big moments. He's looking to go somewhere and make a huge amount of money. Honestly, what I can actually kind of expect, to be honest, is the Steelers get Sherwood, and then Bolton goes to the New York Jets, and the Jets overpay for Nick Bolton, right? That's kind of what I think is actually what's going to end up happening, something to that effect. I love Sherwood coming to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think stylistically he fits what they want him to do, and overall I'm a big fan of his because he's just a really, really good football player. But speaking of good football players, we're going to talk about the last position group here. The Pittsburgh Steelers really need to address, again, outside of the quarterback position. Everyone's talking about that. That's the headline grabber, and that's the cornerback room, right? They need to get some more depth there. We know the Steelers have some issues on offense, but the reality is their defense has some depth issues, and they need to solve some things in the secondary. And that leads us kind of where we're at today. We know Joey Porter Jr. is a really solid player. They got some young guys. Beanie Bishop made a lot of noise in training camp and mini camp. Didn't quite materialize the way a lot of people maybe would have expected. There's a lot of reasons for that, of course. But the reality is the Steelers could use some good, savvy veteran depth in a tough division for corners. Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow going up against those guys twice a year. Not easy to do, of course, in an AFC with a lot of great quarterbacks as well, even outside of the AFC North. So if you're looking at veteran guys, we're looking at Brandon Stevens, and we're looking at Rasul Douglas. And if you pull up Stevens here, I think the interesting thing here is that you're looking at a guy who has a lot of experience. He is not the best football player in the world. His ratings aren't great. His PFF grade is 54. His run defense grade is 67. His PFF coverage grade is 49. But in his defense, he had a career worst year last season. This to me is an example of buying low. He's got a lot of talent. He's had better years. The question is, was he just in a terrible situation last year in a secondary that was falling apart, that had to make a lot of changes? Did he just get caught at a bad time and just had a bad year in a contract year? I think he's better than these numbers, but this is a chance again for the Steelers to potentially get a steal, to get a guy to come in on an ultra team friendly deal and he kind of overplay those numbers and become a better player for Pittsburgh. I think that's what Stevens could be for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But if they want to go the opposite route and they want to kind of get the veteran, the vet who's played a lot of good football, how about Rasul Douglas, right? This is a guy with the Green Bay Packers before and most recently with the Buffalo Bills. Just a good, solid veteran player. Again, numbers don't jump off the page. 54 PFF grade, 61 against the run, 59 against the pass. Give that a little bit of a slack there because he just had a couple really bad games that weighed it down. But he's just a solid, steady veteran. Now, look, he's not the player he once was. He's definitely not coming in being your number one corner. But I think this could be a very solid fit, again, just to add depth. We're not looking for all pros here. We're not looking for the next Mel Blount here or anything like that. We're looking for good, solid depth pieces to round out this defensive backfield. So the Steelers have two options. They try and go for the steal at Stevens, or they get the savvy vet down to the last few years of his career, Rasul Douglas. Honestly, I'm a value guy. I think Stevens is the way to go. I think he had a season last year that was so categorically awful compared to his prior years. I think he's due for a bounce back. He's the guy I have in mind for the Steelers to pick up in that situation.
Yeah, and again, I agree with you. I think Stevens is a really strong player. Like you said, in a Baltimore secondary that really got hurt by a lot of injuries. A lot of guys had to bounce around, got put in a lot of tough positions. But one thing Stevens really great in pass rush situations as well. If they want to blitz a corner, he was the guy to do a 92.9 pass rushing grade last season. Brought a lot to the table there, but like you said, career low numbers for him. Just kind of was tough situation for him after having a really great 2023 for his standards. Looked very solid there. But the other guy on the table, Rasul Douglas, I think he brings a little bit different to the table. He's more of like that kind of, I see him as like a Trevon Diggs light. This is a guy who's a ball hawk. He's able to go out and get the ball. He gets burned sometimes because of it. And I think that kind of adds to his grade, but he does make those plays sometimes. So if you want another ball hawk type of corner on your team, look at a guy like Rasul Douglas. If you want a more balanced, a more all around solid corner, I think Brandon Stevens is that guy, like you said, and I think he's the best value. I think that down year, you really can't preach that enough. Is if you know a guy that's a solid player in the Pittsburgh Steelers, they've seen him every single year, twice a year. They know exactly what you're going to get out of a guy like Stevens. I think he would be a good addition to this team, and I think he's a great value for them as well.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point to end on there. And of course, everyone, if you got your opinions of who you want the Steelers to go after in free agency, love to hear from you guys. Make sure you comment below your thoughts, give us a like, subscribe if you like what you see. But until next time, I'm Nick, that's Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.